Coming up as we roll into our fourth hour, an obituary. It was back in 1948 that the 33 1/3 vinyl LP was first introduced. 43 years later, almost every major label has announced the death of the LP.
Casey's Coast to Coast. Casey's Top 40.
It's the Pop Pulse, AT40 with the Shadow. Well, we've been talking about it for a few years, and now it looks like it's the last call for vinyl albums. Even at the start of the 1980s, cassette sales were overtaking vinyl, and by the end of the 80s, compact discs had really arrived and taken their chunk out of album sales. So now vinyl accounts for only maybe 2 or 3% of total album sales. So I guess it's no surprise that CBS and Warner Brothers Records recently announced that they're phasing out vinyl albums and would no longer allow unsold albums to be returned by record stores. And now another giant record company, MCA, has made the same announcement. 45 RPM vinyl singles are disappearing too in favor of cassettes. So about the only vinyl records left are 12-inch dance singles and vinyl albums from tiny independent labels. So what do you do if you want to replace any old vinyl albums you might have with CDs or cassettes? Well, there are two problems. One, it would cost a lot of money, and two, many of those old LPs aren't available on CD or cassette, so you might want to check before you dash off to make a deal. Meanwhile, let's raise a glass to toast vinyl albums on their final spin, 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 spin.
American Top 40.
Now it's time for an obituary. It was back in 1948 that the 33 1/3 vinyl LP was born. 43 years later, almost every major label has announced this is the LP's last year. Before 1948, the way people listened to music was on bulky, heavy, inconvenient 78 RPM discs. They were made out of shellac, and they had lots of problems. The sound quality was never very good. They scratched and they broke very easily. And worst of all, to play an entire classical symphony took 3 or 4 discs with an interruption between each side to turn the record over or change the disc. Something better was clearly needed. And that something better came along in 1948 when the American Columbia Company introduced their unbreakable vinyl plastic high-fidelity micro-groove long-playing records called LPs for short. They could hold about 30 minutes of music on each side, and they soon swept the old 78s off the market. 10 years later, in 1958, stereo LPs were introduced, and until the mid-80s, LPs were the industry standard. Then a new form of technology was perfected that used a pulsing laser beam to read digital information from a small, unbreakable, unscratchable, unwarpable, virtually flawless-sounding disc, the compact disc or CD. And for the past several years, slowly but surely, CDs have been pushing LPs off the market. At first, there was a lot of resistance from the public. CDs cost more than LPs, and millions of people had invested plenty in their album collections. But CDs sounded better and were a lot more convenient. There was no stopping the forward march of technology, and last year, less than 1% of the recorded music sold in America was on vinyl. This year, many of the major record labels have announced the LP is history. They'll only release albums on cassettes and CDs, and one of those companies is Columbia Records, the people who first introduced the LP 43 years ago. That's our tip of the hat to the vinyl LP, the long-playing record that's brought us many of the biggest hits of the rock era. Now, on with our countdown.
Casey's